I'm a mortician. Last week, at a graveside service with 30 people watching and wind cutting across the headstones, I dodged a punch from a grieving relative and he went over the edge, straight into the open grave, landing on his father's coffin. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. But I'm the one who moved, and I can't stop hearing the sound of boots skidding on loose clay before the thud, the gasp, the screams, and the way every eye turned to me like I'd pushed him there on purpose. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It started 3 days earlier, when the Vasquez family rolled through my front door like a weather front, wet coats, raw voices, the kind of grief that's 50% love and 50% long-simmering resentment. I worked the prep room and the arrangement room in a small-town funeral home off Route 19. It's mostly veterans, farmers, church ladies, overdose kids whose classmates leave flowers in half-rolled joints by the road. I do the unglamorous parts, phone calls, paperwork, cosmetics, casketing, sitting in silence while someone tells me every last favorite song of the person they just lost. I'm not squeamish, but I do have rules. There's the law, health code, licensing, what you can and can't do with human remains. There's the ethical code, dignity, consent, the fact that the dead are still people even when they can't tell you what they want. And then there's the sleep at night code, the line you don't cross even if a checkbook waves. The Vasquezes tested all three. The deceased, Mr. Vasquez, was 63, a retired drywall guy with a laugh line carved so deep it looked like a dimple and nicotine stains that would never wash out of the fingertips we'd be gloving anyway. Heart attack in his recliner, TV still on a baseball rerun. His daughter Mariella did the talking at first, clipboard girl, tight bun, trying to hold the room together. His sons, Eddie and Luis, alternated between pacing and staring holes into the carpet. The widow, Alma, sat small and dry-eyed, like all her tears had happened years ago when he first started breaking promises. That first meeting went sideways on the second page of the arrangement packet. Open casket? I asked, gentle, neutral. We can do a closed service if that's more comfortable. Open, Eddie said immediately. He should be seen. Fine, I said. We'll prepare him for public viewing. We'll set features and do light restorative work if needed. His eyes sharpened. What do you mean set features? We place a caps to support the lids, close the mouth with, he cut me off with a palm. No. No eye caps. No glue. We want his eyes open. That's how he looked, watching the game. And we want him smiling. Big. Like always. I've gotten every strange request you can imagine. Dress him in his bowling shirt. Put the dog in the procession. Tuck a flask in the casket. I navigate. I improvise. But eyes open is a hard no. People think they want it because TV shows corpses gazing peacefully at clouds, but in real life, open eyes look wrong, dry, unfocused, accusatory. They look alive in exactly the way that reminds you they're not. And forcing a grin? That's where dignity goes to die. We don't display with open eyes, I said, steady. It's not sanitary, not stable, and it's distressing to most families. As for a smile, I can soften his expression and lift the corners naturally, but a big grin isn't appropriate. My job is to restore a restful, recognizable likeness. Luis leaned in, breath hot with coffee and cigarettes. You can sew, can't you? Sew the lips like this. He hooked his fingers at his cheeks and yanked upward into a caricature of joy. We want him like that. Happy. He was happy. Mariella's face flickered embarrassment, then anger, then something that looked like protectiveness. Guys, stop, she said. He's the professional. I am, I said, because sometimes people need to hear it said out loud. And I won't sew a grin into your father's face. I won't leave his eyes propped open. I can do a gentle, familiar look. I can style him in his team jersey if that's important, or place his cap in the casket. We can even set a small portable screen at the visitation playing his favorite innings if the funeral director signs off. But I won't stage a puppet. That should have been the end of it. We compromise, we move on. But grief looks for a fight when it can't find a fix. Over the next 48 hours the requests got stranger, harder, uglier. Eddie brought in a photograph where his father, 30 years younger, had a wide, toothy grin in a beer garden. Like this, he said, tapping the photo until his finger left a sweat spot, like the dead could hear him and behave. Alma, silent until then, reached into her purse and pulled out a plastic rosary so worn the beads were oval. He smiled like that when he lied, she said softly, not looking at me. He smiled when he came home drunk. He smiled when he promised to quit. Then she closed her fist and said nothing else the rest of the day. We did the prep with care. I set his features respectfully. I fixed the discoloration. I chose a quiet touch of color, the kind that makes people say he looks like he's sleeping even though everyone knows he's not. I put his team cap in his hands and his jersey folded at the foot of the casket because you pick your battles. When the family came for private viewing the night before, Mariella cried the way a dam cries, the silent crack, then everything all at once. Alma stared for a long time, then kissed her fingers and touched them to his forehead. The suns circled like sharks. Corners higher, Luis said, pointing at his father's mouth. He looks smug, Eddie said. He never looked smug. He looks peaceful, I said. He looks like himself. He looks dead, Luis snapped, as if I'd failed at the main task of my profession, undoing the fact of what had happened. Can't you sew him? No, I said, not unkindly, but not gently either. I cannot and I will not. We tabled it for morning. Which brings me to the graveside. Windy, cold, the kind of sky that can't make up its mind. The service at the chapel had been tense but controlled. The priest spoke comfort, the cousins shared piecemeal stories, the grandkids wriggled in their dress shoes. When we moved to the cemetery for committal, I felt the Vasquez boys stiffen like dogs on a leash. The casket hovered on the lowering device, straps tight, greens laid neatly to make the raw mouth of the earth a little less obscene. I did my quiet checks, brakes set on the coach, pallbearers spaced, staff ready, prayer cards tucked. The priest finished the final blessing. People stepped forward with roses. This is the pause where families find their own way. Some pray. Some joke. Some smoke in defiance of a rule nobody can enforce on grief. Eddie stepped up to me instead, jaw clenched like it might crack his molars. One last chance, he said. We take him home for a minute, 15, 20 max, and you give him the smile. He's not leaving our custody, I said. And we're not doing that. He's our father, Louise said. He's our liability, I said, because sometimes precision keeps you safe. And my responsibility. The answer is no. He moved first, a quick, ugly thing, elbow up, shoulder forward, old street fight muscle memory aimed square at my chest to knock me back and clear the space he wanted. I don't know if he meant to throw me or the casket. I don't know if he knew how close he was to the edge. I only know I learned a long time ago to stand with one foot open and one foot back when I'm near a grave, because clay crumbles and grief lunges. So when he came at me, I pivoted. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't even graceful. I just wasn't where he expected. His boot slid on the damp sod, the strap under his heel rolled like a bad ankle, and in one terrible, slow-motion beat he pinwheeled, grabbed air, missed my sleeve by an inch, and vanished over the side. The sound he made wasn't a scream. Screens climb. This dropped. Bodies in clay don't echo, they stop. For a heartbeat nobody moved. Then every sound came at once, Mariella's NL, the priest's Jesus, a cousin's holy, kids crying because adults were using voices kids don't understand. I leaned over the edge, every training I've ever had shoving to the front of my brain, and saw him sprawled across the satin lid, one arm bent wrong, eyes wide with pure animal shock. Don't move! I yelled, palm up, voice loud and even like we get taught for this exact kind of nightmare. We're going to get you out. And as I said it, every face turned to me, anger, accusation, relief, calculation, and I felt the weight of the next 10 minutes lay its full body across my shoulders, because no matter what had actually happened, I was the mortician who just watched the son fall onto his father's coffin. The cemetery staff scrambled. One of the groundskeepers grabbed a ladder, another radioed for paramedics, and all I could do was keep my hands out where everyone could see them. I swear, half those mourners were ready to swear in court that I shoved him, even though I hadn't touched him. When people are angry and broken, they don't need facts, they need someone to blame. And I was standing in the wrong suit at the wrong time. Louis, flat on his back, moaning, kept trying to sit up. His arm bent in ways it shouldn't have. I told him not to move, kept my tone even, professional. That's our training, grief explodes, panic spreads, you stay calm. But inside, my heart was punching my ribs, because all I could think was, God help me, they're going to say I did this. Mariella was the first to snap out of it. She grabbed her brother's hand from the edge of the grave, tears streaming. Stay still, Louise, please, they're coming, she said, her voice breaking. Eddie was less controlled. He spun on me, finger jabbing. You fought him, you shoved him. His voice cracked like dry wood. He asked you for one thing and you threw him in there with our dad. Every eye swung to me again. I opened my hands, palms visible, and said loud enough for everyone, I didn't touch him. He came at me, I stepped aside. He slipped. That's the truth. My voice was steady, but my gut was pure acid. Because it didn't matter what actually happened. In funerals, perception is reality, and the Vasquez family already hated me for refusing their requests. The paramedics arrived fast, sirens tearing the quiet, blue and red lights reflecting off marble stones. They lowered a spine board into the grave, strapped Luis down, and hauled him up inch by inch. Every groan he made was another nail in my coffin, or so it felt. Eddie glared the whole time, muttering under his breath to anyone who'd listen. Words like murderer, psycho, lunatic. I caught snippets from the crowd. Did you see? He barely touched, I don't know, looked like. When they loaded Luis into the ambulance, Eddie turned back one last time and spat at the ground near my shoes. We'll deal with you after this, he hissed. Mariella shot him a look, half warning, half plea, but didn't contradict him. I drove back to the funeral home on autopilot. My hands shook on the wheel, and when I parked, I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the steering column, trying to breathe. I dealt with drunk mourners, violent outbursts, even one fistfight between cousins at a wake. But this, someone falling into the grave and breaking bones, it was a nightmare I hadn't rehearsed. And the part that terrified me most wasn't the accident itself. It was how quickly grief had rewritten it into a story where I was the villain. By the time I walked inside, the director already knew. Cemeteries talk, and faster than any phone tree. He was waiting in his office, tie loosened, face heavy. I got a call, he said, voice low. They're saying you pushed him. I didn't, I said, sharper than I meant. He charged at me. I moved. He slipped. The director rubbed his temples. I believe you. But you know how this works. Perception is everything. We can't afford lawsuits. We can't afford headlines. That night, I barely slept. I replayed it over and over, the shove, the slip, the fall. Each time it shifted slightly, like my own memory didn't trust me. Had I stepped too hard? Had my elbow brushed his? Was there some part of me that wanted him to fall, just to end the constant harassment? Those questions gnawed at me until dawn, and I hated myself for even thinking them. By morning, the Vasquez family had split in two camps. Mariella called the director, saying it was an accident, that Luis lost his footing. Eddie, meanwhile, was on Facebook posting about the mortician who assaulted my brother at our father's funeral. His post had 50 comments by noon, people swearing they'd always known something was off about that funeral home. And I sat in the prep room, scalpel in hand, working on a new case, wondering how much longer before one family's grief destroyed not just my job, but my whole damn life. 2 days later, the police showed up at the funeral home. Not sirens and cuffs, just two uniforms stepping in with the quiet, tired walk of men who've done this too many times. The director called me out of the prep room, latex gloves still dusted with powder. "Mister," the older officer asked. I nodded, throat dry. "We need your statement about what happened at St. Mary's Cemetery." We sat in the director's office. I laid it out plain, the request for the smile, the refusal, the confrontation, the shove, the slip, the fall. I kept my voice steady, but inside I was unraveling. Every detail felt like a blade I had to hold by the edge, too sharp and I'd cut myself, too soft and they'd think I was lying. The younger officer scribbled notes, expression unreadable. The older one just watched me, eyes heavy, like he'd seen enough families torn apart to know where this might go. When I finished, he leaned back. "Here's the situation. Luis says you assaulted him. His brother backs that up. His sister doesn't. Half the crowd swears you shoved him. The other half says he slipped. We don't have clear evidence either way. So what happens?" I asked. He folded his arms. "Right now? Nothing. No charges. But if they push it, civil suit, complaint to the board, this could get ugly. Write down everything while it's fresh. Every word, every step. It'll matter later." They left. I sat there staring at the wood grain on the desk until the director sighed. "Take a few days off," he said. "Let this cool down. I'll handle the viewings." But it didn't cool down. Eddie's Facebook post had gone viral in town by then, hundreds of shares, comments ranging from "fire that psycho" to "knew something was shady about them." Someone even left a 1-star Google review, "Dangerous staff, don't trust your loved ones here." I hadn't touched a single grieving family in 48 hours, but my name was already poison. At home, the silence was worse. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't want to read. My mom called, voice shaking, asking if I'd really thrown a man into a grave. My brother laughed when I told him the truth, like it was a bar story, not the unraveling of my career. I shut off my phone and sat in the dark, trying to breathe through the weight on my chest. Then, at midnight, someone banged on my door. Not polite. Not hesitant. Angry. I froze, listening. A voice I knew too well shouted through the wood, "Eddie. You think you can hide? You ruined my brother's life. You ruined my father's funeral. You don't get to walk away from this." The pounding went on until my neighbor threatened to call the cops. When the silence finally returned, I sat on the floor, back against the door, wondering how a job built on dignity and respect had turned me into the town's villain overnight. And the worst part? I still had to go back. Because bodies don't stop coming, grief doesn't pause for scandal, and I was still the mortician with work to do. When I finally walked back into the funeral home after those days off, the air felt different. My co-workers weren't cold, but they weren't normal either. A few avoided eye contact. One girl in the office gave me a look like I'd grown horns. The director handed me a clipboard without a word, his lips pressed so tight I knew he was praying I'd keep my head down and not give anyone more reason to whisper. The first family of the day sat waiting in the arrangement room. Middle-aged daughter, 2 sons, their mother in a wheelchair. Normal enough. Except the second I walked in, the daughter stiffened. She glanced at her brothers like she was confirming something. Then she said flatly, "You're the one who threw that man in a grave." My stomach dropped. "That's not what happened," I started, but she cut me off. "We don't want you working on our mother," she said. "We asked for someone else. If that's not possible, we'll take our business somewhere else." The director had to step in, smooth things over. He shuffled me out like a bouncer escorting out a drunk. I caught snippets as he talked, misunderstanding, investigation, our staff is professional. But the looks on their faces said it didn't matter. Rumor had already made me guilty. I retreated to the prep room and buried myself in paperwork, but the walls felt closer than ever. Even the embalming machine's steady hum couldn't drown out the thought, I am radioactive. Nobody trusts me anymore. And it only got worse. The Vasquez family wasn't content with Facebook rants. They went to the local paper. The headline 2 days later, family claims mortician attacks son at father's burial. No charges filed yet, but the story ran with a photo of Luis in a hospital bed, arm in a cast, scowl on his face. Eddie's quotes filled the column. All we wanted was respect for our father. Instead, we got violence. Calls flooded in. Some families canceled pre-arranged services. A church asked the director to send a different staff member for their parishioner's burial. Even deliveries came with awkward silence. One flower shop guy muttered, "Didn't think you'd still be here." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of cheap whiskey, staring at the article on my phone. My face wasn't pictured, thank God, but everyone in town knew who the Mortician was. I kept refreshing, hoping for comments defending me. Instead, I saw strangers piling on, typing things like "sick freak" and "don't let him near your family." I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock on every door and tell the truth. He came at me. I didn't push him. I didn't want any of this. But words are weak against grief. Once people decide you're a monster, every protest just sounds like another lie. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I drove back to the funeral home. The prep room was dark, empty, but the stainless steel tables gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I sat there in the silence, surrounded by tools and tubes, and wondered if I was sitting in my own graveyard, if this career, this life I'd built on quiet respect, was already dead. And yet, the phone would still ring tomorrow. Another family would still need me. Bodies don't stop coming, no matter how ruined you are. The summons came on a Wednesday morning, folded neatly into an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Not a warrant, not yet, just an official request to appear for a follow-up interview at the station. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, the coffee in my other hand sloshing onto the floor. I already knew what it meant. The Vasquez family wasn't letting this go. By then, the town already had its story. The newspaper article had been shared 100 times over. Eddie was treating Facebook like his personal megaphone, posting long rants about how his family had been betrayed by the very person who was supposed to show them dignity. And Luis, arm in a sling, had uploaded a hospital selfie with the caption, "Never thought I'd survive my own father's funeral." The comments were endless strings of "praying for you, justice will come," and "sue the hell out of that creep." Every time I tried to walk down Main Street, eyes followed me. At the grocery store, two women at the deli counter whispered behind their hands. At the gas station, some guy muttered, "Grave pusher," just loud enough for me to hear. My own neighbor, who used to wave whenever I left for work, now avoided eye contact. It was like the entire town had already held a trial and I'd been convicted. At the station, the detective this time wasn't as neutral as the first pair of cops. She was sharp, mid-40s, the kind of woman who didn't have time for bullshit. So, she said, clicking her pen, "Walk me through it again." Slowly. I repeated everything, the request for the smile, the refusal, the confrontation, the pivot, the fall. I emphasized that I never laid a hand on him. She asked the same question 3 different ways. "Did you touch him at all? Did your elbow make contact? Did you push off to defend yourself?" Each time I said no, but the look in her eyes told me she didn't fully buy it. Not because she had evidence I knew she didn't, but because in her world, where everyone lies, denial is just another tactic. When it was over, she slid a card across the table. "We're still gathering statements. Don't leave town." Back at the funeral home, the director called me into his office. His desk was piled with files, his glasses halfway down his nose. "They're threatening a civil suit," he said, voice heavy. "Luis's attorney already called. They want damages for medical bills and emotional distress." My stomach turned. "But it was an accident." "Accident doesn't mean anything in civil court," he said. "If they convince a jury you pushed him, we're on the hook. And if we're on the hook, so are you." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about the hundreds of funerals I'd worked over the years. I'd handled overdoses, gunshot victims, infants who hadn't made it past their first breaths. I dealt with families who screamed at me, prayed over me, hugged me, even blamed me for things I had no control over. But never, not once, had I been accused of violence. My entire career was built on being invisible, professional, the steady hand in chaos. And now all that was ash. The next day at a graveside service for another family, things got worse. As we lowered the casket, I noticed a man off to the side with a camera. Not a mourner, not press either, just some guy recording on his phone. At first I thought he was filming for the family, but then he kept pointing it at me. Afterward, I overheard him say to someone, "That's the guy who pushed the Vasquez kid." My skin went cold. By evening, a clip had made its way online, me standing by a casket, looking grim, with the caption, "Here's the psycho mortician still working like nothing happened." Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. Most were ugly. "Creep. Monster. Fire him already." Some even threatened violence. If he touched my family like that, he'd be in the ground too. I started locking my door twice, then 3 times at night. I double-checked my rearview mirror on the way home. Once, I thought I saw Eddie's truck tailing me. I turned twice and lost it, but my heart didn't stop racing for hours. The breaking point came on Friday. A new family arrived to arrange a service for their grandmother. I sat across from them, trying to keep my hands from shaking, when the eldest son leaned forward and said, "No offense, but we don't want you handling her. We saw what you did." His mother nodded silently beside him, clutching her rosary like I was some kind of demon. I excused myself, walked straight into the prep room, and slammed the door. My chest hurt, my vision blurred. For the first time, I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here anymore. But then I remembered Luis's face, twisted in anger, lunging at me. I remembered the feel of the damp clay shifting under his boots, the sound of him falling. I hadn't pushed him. I knew it. And I wasn't going to let grief and gossip rewrite the truth. So I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and burnt coffee. His name was Harris, a gray-haired man with a sharp jaw and sharper eyes. He didn't waste time with small talk. He flipped through the newspaper article about me, the police notes I'd brought, and the screenshots of Eddie's Facebook rants. Then he leaned back and steepled his fingers. "You're not being charged criminally yet," he said. "But if they file a civil suit, they'll drag your name through the mud. And judging by this circus, that's exactly what they plan to do." I swallowed hard. So what do I do? First, you don't talk to them directly. No calls, no messages, no showing up to explain yourself. That's what they want, something they can twist. Second, we build witnesses. Was anyone at that funeral who saw clearly? Anyone who'll testify you didn't touch him? I thought about it. The priest. A couple of cousins. Maybe even Mariella, if she was willing to contradict her brothers. But the doubt gnawed at me. People say one thing in the moment, then grief rewrites it later. Would anyone actually stand up for me when the Vasquez boys turned the whole town against me? "Start making a list," Harris said. "And remember, truth isn't enough. You need proof, or at least credibility. Right now, they have the sympathy vote. You have to fight uphill." When I left his office, the town felt even smaller. Every car horn sounded like it was aimed at me. Every laugh on the street sounded like it was about me. I drove back to the funeral home, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. That afternoon, during a visitation for another family, I felt it again, eyes burning into me. A man in the back row, uncle of the deceased, just stared the entire time, arms crossed, like he was waiting for me to slip. When the service ended, he muttered, "You don't belong here," loud enough for everyone around him to hear. And then, as if on cue, the whispers started, "That's him. The one from the Vasquez funeral." I clenched my jaw and kept moving, because that's what morticians do. We move through grief like ghosts ourselves, invisible, necessary, never the center of attention. But now I was the spectacle. That night, Harris called me. "Bad news," he said. "Luis's attorney filed notice. They're suing for medical expenses, lost wages, and emotional damages. $500,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $500,000? It's posturing, Harris said. They don't expect that much. But it puts pressure on you. And on your employer. Pressure was an understatement. The next morning, the director called me into his office. He looked like he hadn't slept. "They're going after the funeral home too," he said. "Not just you. Our insurance might cover part of it, but if this keeps bleeding clients, we won't survive." I stared at him. "So what are you saying?" He sighed. "I'm saying you might want to think about stepping back. Just until this clears. If it clears." It hit me like a shovel to the chest. This place wasn't just a job, it was my life. I'd spent years here, comforting strangers, honoring the dead, doing work nobody else wanted to touch. And now, because one man slipped, I was being erased. I walked out without answering. Went straight to the prep room, locked the door, and leaned on the cold steel table. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface, pale and hollow-eyed. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they'd win, not in court, not legally, but by grinding me down until I couldn't stand anymore. But then I remembered something, Mariella's face at the graveside. The way she'd shouted in "oh" when Luis fell, the way she'd looked at me not with hatred, but with shock. She'd seen what happened. She knew. And if I was going to survive this, I needed her to speak. I hadn't spoken to Mariella since the day of the funeral. Every attempt to reach her had died before I hit call, because I knew how it would look, the mortician harassing the grieving daughter. But after Harris's call, I realized I couldn't avoid it any longer. She was the only person in that family who hadn't screamed for my head, the only one whose eyes had carried something closer to truth than vengeance. I drove to her house on a rainy Sunday afternoon, my stomach in knots. Her street was quiet, lined with cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences. When I knocked, I half expected Eddie to answer, fists already balled. Instead, Mariella opened the door, her hair in a loose braid, her face drawn and pale like she hadn't slept since the funeral. The moment she saw me, her jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I said quickly. "I won't stay long. Please, Mariella. You saw what happened. You know I didn't push him." Her eyes flickered, conflicted. She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. The rain misted around us, dampening the concrete. "Do you think I don't know what my brothers are like?" she whispered. "Luis came at you. He always comes at people when he's angry." I told him to stop. But now he's milking it, acting like a victim. And Eddie. Eddie just wants blood. He doesn't care about truth, he cares about rage. Relief washed through me, sharp and almost painful. Then you'll testify? You'll tell them it was an accident? Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? To my family? Eddie would never forgive me. My mother would think I was betraying them. They'd cut me off forever. I'd be the sister who defended the man who attacked her brother at our father's funeral. Do you think I can live with that? I swallowed hard. Can you live with lying? She flinched, tears pooling. Don't put this on me, she whispered. I didn't ask for any of this. We stood there in silence, rain dripping from the eaves, until finally she said, I'll think about it. Then she slipped back inside, leaving me staring at the peeling paint on her door, wondering if I'll think about it was just another way of saying no. When I told Harris, he sighed. It's something. Better than nothing. But don't count on her. People fold under family pressure. We need more. Meanwhile, the press had smelled blood. A local news crew showed up outside the funeral home one morning, cameras rolling as I tried to slip inside. Mister, did you assault a grieving son at his father's funeral? Do you have anything to say to the Vasquez family? Are you still allowed to work on bodies after the accusations? I kept walking, head down, heart pounding. But later, in the prep room, with the fluorescent lights buzzing and the faint smell of formaldehyde in the air, I realized hiding wasn't working. The Vasquezes were telling their story everywhere. If I stayed silent, their version would become the only version. So I called Harris and said, I want to make a statement. He groaned. Public statements are messy. They twist your words. But if you're dead set on it, we'll draft it carefully. 2 days later, I stood on the funeral home steps with Harris beside me, facing a row of cameras and microphones. My palms were sweating, but my voice came out steady. I want to say clearly, I did not assault anyone. Luis Vasquez came at me. I stepped aside. He slipped. It was a tragic accident. I respect every family I serve, and I would never harm anyone in grief. I've dedicated my life to this work, to honoring the dead and comforting the living. What happened that day has been twisted, but the truth is simple, I did not push him. Reporters shouted questions, but Harris tugged me back inside before I could answer. My statement aired that night, clipped and spliced between interviews with Eddie and Luis. Eddie called me a liar. Luis sat in his sling, grimacing, saying, all I know is I wouldn't be like this if he hadn't shoved me. The war had gone public. And now, it wasn't just about one accident at a graveside, it was about my entire career, my reputation, and whether I could survive in a town that seemed to have already made up its mind. That night, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number, you're digging your own grave. And for the first time, I wondered if they meant that literally. The text message rattled around my skull for days, you're digging your own grave. Anonymous number, blocked before I could respond. It could have been some punk kid, or it could have been Eddie, or worse, someone who actually meant it. Either way, I started triple-checking my locks at night and sleeping with a baseball bat propped against the wall. Harris told me not to panic. They're trying to rattle you, he said. Classic intimidation. Ignore it. Easy for him to say he didn't have to walk alone through a dark parking lot at midnight after a visitation, ears straining for footsteps. He didn't have to wonder if the crunch of gravel behind him was a mourner or someone waiting to make good on a threat. Meanwhile, the lawsuit gained traction. Luis's attorney filed paperwork painting me as reckless and violent, unfit for professional responsibility. Eddie went on the local radio station, calling me a danger to the community. My name was spat like a curse. The funeral home phone rang off the hook with reporters asking for comment. Half the time, families wanted reassurance that I wouldn't be handling their loved ones. The director finally snapped. He pulled me into his office, slammed the door, and said, do you understand what this is doing to us? We've lost 3 clients this week because of you. People are calling us a circus. I didn't push him, I said through clenched teeth. I know, he barked. But truth doesn't matter anymore. Perception does. And right now, perception is killing us. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. But his words clung like tar. Truth doesn't matter anymore. That night, Harris began prepping me for court. He sat across from me in his cramped office, stacks of files leaning precariously. They'll hammer you on your temper, he warned. They'll say you snapped, that you lost patience with grieving clients. They'll use every strange request you ever refused as proof you were combative. Be ready for that. My temper? I asked, stunned. I've worked this job for years. I've been screamed at, cursed at, accused of being a ghoul. I've never once lost my cool. They don't care about history, Harris said. They care about narrative. And right now, theirs is louder than yours. I spent hours rehearsing testimony, going over every detail until it felt less like memory and more like a script. Still, doubt crept in. Each time Harris asked, did you make any contact at all, a shadowy part of my brain whispered, what if you brushed his sleeve? What if your elbow grazed him? I hated myself for even thinking it. Then the threats escalated. At first it was just texts. Then notes slipped under my windshield wiper at the grocery store, stay out of town. Dead men don't lie. Once, I found a crudely drawn stick figure in a grave, the word you scribbled above it. I reported them to the police, but the detective barely looked up from her notepad. No direct threats of violence, she said. Probably just kids messing with you. But kids don't know where I park. Kids don't know the exact kind of shovel we use at the cemetery, which showed up leaning against my front porch one morning. I felt myself unraveling. Every ring of the phone jolted me. Every knock at the door froze me in place. My job, once quiet and steady, had turned into a battlefield where grief, rage, and rumor collided, and I was the target. The only sliver of light came from an unexpected place, the priest who'd presided over the Vasquez funeral. He showed up at the funeral home one evening, collar loosened, eyes kind. I saw what happened, he said gently. You didn't push him. You moved. He fell. If you need me to say that, I will. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe the truth had a fighting chance. But I also knew what would come next, the Vasquezes tearing him apart, calling him biased, claiming he was protecting me. Harris said it best, this isn't about facts anymore. It's about who people believe. And right now, the court of public opinion isn't on your side. I drove home that night with the priest's words echoing in my head, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. And as I pulled into my driveway, headlights flared behind me, too close, too sudden. A truck idled at the curb, engine growling. Eddie's truck. He didn't get out. He just sat there, staring at me through the windshield, until finally he revved the engine and peeled off into the dark. I stood there in the silence afterward, the shovel still propped on my porch, and realized something chilling. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was personal. And they weren't going to stop until one of us was buried. The court date landed like a thunderclap. Harris slid the notice across his desk, his expression grim. Pre-trial hearing in 3 weeks, he said. That's when we find out if this gets tossed or if we're marching into a full-blown circus. 3 weeks. 21 days to either salvage my career or watch it sink 6 feet under, same as the bodies I buried. In that time, the threats kept coming. Another note tucked under my windshield at the funeral home, see you in the ground. A voicemail from a blocked number, just heavy breathing and then a low chuckle before the line cut off. One night, as I walked to my car after a late prep session, I heard footsteps behind me, fast, closing in. I spun, fists clenched only to see a stray dog darting into the bushes. I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that breaks halfway into a sob. My nerves were shredded. But there were cracks in the Vasquez wall, too. Harris had tracked down 3 cousins who'd been at the graveside. 2 were non-committal, didn't want to get involved. But one, a lanky guy named Raphael, agreed to sign a statement. Luis tripped, he said bluntly. I was standing right there. He lunged, he missed, he fell. Nobody pushed him. The priest put his promise in writing as well. That gave us at least 2 voices saying what I'd been screaming all along, it was an accident. Harris said it wasn't bulletproof, but it was something. Meanwhile, the funeral home teetered on the edge. The director held emergency meetings, whispering about insurance hikes and cancellations. One employee quit outright, muttering that she didn't want to work with a criminal. The air inside the building was poison, thick with resentment and fear. I stayed in the prep room more and more, surrounded by silence and stainless steel, because at least the dead didn't judge me. Then, one night, it escalated beyond whispers and notes. I was driving home on the highway, headlights cutting through the dark, when another set of lights flared in my rearview mirror. A truck. Too close. My gut knew before my brain did, Eddie. He tailed me for miles, swerving, flashing his brights, riding my bumper. I slowed, he slowed. I sped up, he sped up. At one point he pulled alongside, window down, his face twisted in a grin that wasn't joy but pure malice. He mouthed something, 2 words I couldn't hear, but I could read them clear, you're dead. Then he swerved hard toward me, his truck veering inches into my lane. I yanked the wheel, heart slamming into my throat, barely keeping control as my tires screeched against the shoulder. He honked, laughing, before peeling off into the night. I sat there on the shoulder, shaking, the engine ticking in the silence. If I'd panicked half a second slower, I'd have flipped into the ditch. That wasn't intimidation anymore. That was attempted murder. I called Harris, voice trembling. He told me to file a police report immediately. I did. The detective listened, typed, and finally looked me dead in the eyes. We'll check into it, she said flatly. But I could tell, without video, without proof, it would just be my word against his. Again. By the time I staggered into bed, adrenaline still poisoning my veins, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about a lawsuit. This wasn't about money. The Vasquez family wanted to destroy me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to bury but my reputation and maybe my body. And as the pretrial hearing loomed, I asked myself the question that had been circling like a vulture since the fall: how do you bury a lie that refuses to stay dead? The courthouse smelled like floor polish and nerves. Harris walked beside me, clutching his briefcase like it contained holy scripture. My palms were sweating, my throat was sandpaper. Pretrial hearings aren't supposed to be dramatic, just lawyers arguing over whether a case should move forward, but for me it felt like Judgment Day. The Vasquez family was already there when we walked in. Eddie sat front row, jaw clenched, eyes burning holes into me. Luis was beside him, arm still in a sling, milking the injury for all it was worth. He looked right at me and shook his head slowly, like a teacher disappointed in a bad student. Mariella was a few seats back, staring at the floor, refusing to look at either of us. Their mother sat silently, face stone, rosary clutched so tight her knuckles were white. The judge entered, gavel cracking like thunder. The attorneys made their cases. Luis's lawyer painted me as reckless, hostile, a man who snapped under pressure and shoved a grieving son into his own father's grave. He leaned into the drama, his voice rising as he described the horror of a sacred ceremony desecrated by violence. Harris countered with calm precision. He presented Raphael's statement, the priest's testimony, even a written affidavit from another mourner who'd seen Luis lunge. This was a tragic accident, he said firmly. Nothing more. Then the witnesses were called. Raphael spoke first, his voice steady. Luis slipped. That's all. He lunged at the mortician and lost his footing. The priest followed, his collar gleaming under the lights. I was there. I saw. He was not pushed. He fell. It should have been enough. But then Luis took the stand. He told his story with the polished conviction of a man who'd rehearsed it in the mirror for weeks. He shoved me, he said, voice breaking at all the right moments. I asked for respect for my father, and instead I was attacked. Eddie nodded along, glaring at me like he was daring me to flinch. When Harris cross-examined, Luis grew defensive. You lunged, didn't you? Harris asked. You moved toward him. Luis shook his head. I was standing still. He pushed me. A lie, plain and simple, but his tone dripped with righteous indignation. The kind juries eat up. Finally, the judge turned to me. Mister, do you wish to make a statement? My knees nearly buckled, but I stood. My voice came out low at first, then grew steadier. I've worked as a mortician for years. I've seen every kind of grief, every kind of anger. I've been cursed at, screamed at, accused of things I didn't do. But I have never laid hands on a grieving family. That day, Luis came at me. I stepped aside. He slipped. That is the truth. I would never push someone into a grave. My entire job, my entire life, is built on respect. And I refuse to let that be rewritten as violence. Silence hung heavy. The judge tapped his pen, eyes unreadable. Then he spoke. There is conflicting testimony. However, given multiple witnesses corroborating the defendant's account, this court does not find sufficient grounds to proceed with criminal charges. Civil matters may continue, but as of now, Mr. is not facing prosecution. My chest nearly collapsed with relief. I wasn't free, not entirely, but I wasn't going to prison. The Vasquezes exploded. Eddie cursed loud enough to echo, Luis muttered threats under his breath, their mother sobbed into a rosary. Mariella finally looked at me, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes held sorrow, not anger. Then she turned away. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Harris guided me through the crowd like a bodyguard. This isn't over, he warned. Civil court will drag on. Public opinion may never shift. But today, you survived. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The baseball bat still leaned by the wall. The anonymous threats still buzzed in the back of my mind. My job was hanging by a thread, my reputation shredded. But I was still here. Still standing. And as I stared at my reflection in the dark window, I told myself the same words I told countless grieving families: we move forward, one day at a time. Because sometimes survival is the only victory you get.